Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram.
Hare Krishna devotees, please accept my humble obeisances. Always will Govind Guru Maharaj. Radharani Mataji, whenever you're ready, you can start, Mataji.
Sure. Hare Krishna to all dear devotees. Please accept my humble obeisances. All goes to Srila Prabhupada and Guru Maharaj. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskrutyam Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Udirayet. नष्टप्रायेषु अभद्रेषु नित्यं भागवत सेवया भगवते उत्तमश्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्ठिकी. Today we are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 1. Genealogical table of the daughters of Manu from the text 12. Text 1. You have already been informed about the 9 daughters of Kardama Muni, who were handed over to the 9 different sages. I shall now describe the descendants of those 9 daughters. Please hear from me. Text 13. Kardama Muni daughters Kala, who was married to the Marichi, gave birth to the 2 children, whose names were Kashyapa and Purnima. Their descendants are spread all over the world. Text 14. My dear Vidura, of the 2 sons, Kashyapa and Purnima, Purnima begot the 3 children, namely Viraja, Vishwagha, and Devakulya. Of these 3, Devakulya was the water which washed the lotus feet of the personality of Godhead and which later on transformed into the Ganges of the heavenly planets. Text 15. Anasuya, the wife of Atri Muni, gave birth to 3 very famous sons, Soma, Dattatreya, and Durvasa, who were partially representations of Lord Vishnu, Lord Shiva, and Lord Brahma. Soma was a partial representation of Lord Brahma. Dattatreya was a partial representation of Lord Vishnu, and Durvasa was a partial representation of Lord Shiva. Text 16. After hearing these, Vidura inquired from Maitreya, my dear master, how is it that the 3 deities, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, who are the creator, maintainer, and the destroyer of the whole creation, became the offspring of the wife of Atri Muni? Text 17. Maitreya said, when Lord Brahma ordered Atri Muni to the create generations after marrying Anasuya, Atri Muni and his wife went to perform severe austerities in the valley of the mountain known as Raksha. Text 18. In that mountain valley flows a river named Nirvindya. On the bank of the river are many Ashoka trees and other plants full of palasa flowers, and there is also a sweet sound of water flowing from a waterfall. The husband and wife reached that beautiful place. Text 19. There the great sage concentrated his mind by the yogic breathing exercise, and thereby controlling all attachments, he remained standing on one leg only, eating nothing but air, and stood there on one leg for 100 years. Text 20th. He was thinking, may the Lord of the universe, of whom I have taken shelter, kindly be pleased to offer me a son exactly like me. Text 21. While Atri Muni was engaging in these severe austerities, a blazing fire came out of his head by virtue of his breathing exercise, and that fire was seen by the 3 principal deities of the 3 worlds. Text 22. At that time, the 3 deities approached the hermitage of Atri Muni, accompanied by the denizens of the heavenly planets, such as the celestial beauties. the Gandharvas, the Siddhas, and Vidyadharas, and the Nagas. Thus, they entered the ashrama of the great sages who had become famous by his austerities. Text 23. The sage was standing on one leg, but as soon as he saw that the three deities has appeared before him, he was so pleased to see them all together that despite great difficulty he approached them on one leg. Text 24. Thereafter he began to offer prayers to the three deities who were seated on the different carriers, a bull, a swan, and Garuda, and who held in their hands a drum, kusa grass, and the disc. The sage offered them his respect by falling down like a stick. Thank you so much, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Radharani Mataji, for reading today. Thank you all the devotees for attending, giving me this opportunity to discuss something from Srimad Bhagavatam. I'm going to start by offering prayers. Om Kyantimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Te Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesh Shunyavadi Paschat Deshatarane. Mukham Karoti Vachalam Pangam Langayate Girim Yatkripātam Ham Vande Shri Gurudeena Taranam. Hare Krishna, dear devotees, we'll be reading today, continuing from text 12 onwards. This is reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4. The title of the canto is Creation of the Fourth Order. Am I audible to everybody, and can we see my screen?
Yes, Prabhuji, can see you.
Yes.
So, just to give a brief overview. So, in the third canto, there was a description of the primary creation of this material world, and that is called Sarga. And from there onwards, in the third canto, the discussion continued to the secondary creation, which is called Visarga. So as part of the secondary creation, in this conversation between Vidura and Maitreya Muni, Maitreya Muni goes on to describe one of the primary progenitors of this world, that is Swayambhuva Manu and Shatarupa and their dynasty. So in the third canto, he started describing about the first daughter of Swayambhuva Manu, Mother Devahuti, and we saw how wonderfully Mother Devahuti and Kadamba Muni met, and through them there was appearance of Lord Kapila, and how Lord Kapila wonderfully expounded the Sankhya philosophy, discussing all the tribulations that the living entity goes through in this material world, and how through that understanding we can come closer to understanding of Supreme Personality of Godhead. At that point, Maitreya Muni had mentioned that Radama Muni and Mata Devahuti had 9 other daughters, but that discussion was left for later time, for today. So in the beginning of the fourth canto yesterday, we read about the second daughter of Shatarup and Swayambhuva Manu. The second daughter was Akuti. And yesterday, Krishnadas Prabhu wonderfully explained how through Akuti and Prajapati Ruchi, Lord appeared as Yagya, and Mother Lakshmi appeared as Dakshina. So with that, 12 sons were born, who were the Tushitas, and they went on to become the demigods in this current Manvantara. So the next part of the discussion should be moving on to the third daughter, that is Prasuti. So we talked about Mother Devahuti, Akuti, and now the third daughter of Swayambhuva Manu and Shatarup is Prasuti. And the third daughter, Prasuti, in the later chapters we see is married to Daksha Prajapati, who's another progenitor of this world. And through that union, 16 children were born, 16 daughters were born. And the 16th daughter did not have any child. And that raises then Vidur raises a question to that. In response to that question, we heard about the pastimes of Lord Shiva and Daksh Prajapati and the misunderstandings that happened. That comes up in the next few chapters in the fourth canto. And in the remaining part of the fourth canto, after talking about the three daughters of Swayambhuva Manu, the discussion moves on to the two sons, that is Maharaj Uttanapad. So in the remaining part of the fourth canto, we will hear the discussion about Maharaj Uttanapad's lineage, that is includes Dhruv Maharaj, all the way down to the Prachetas. And in the fifth canto will be the discussion on the fifth child of Swayambhuva Manu, that is Priyavrata Maharaj. So in this way, the secondary creation and all the progenitors involved in the Visarga is going to be explained. But here, before we move on from Akuti to Prasuti's lineage, Maitri Rishi wants to he wants to complete the lineage of Mother Devahuti and talk about the 9 daughters that were mentioned earlier, but were not discussed in detail. That is where our discussion today starts. In text 12, it is described that Muni tells Vidura that you have already been informed about the 9 daughters of Kardama Muni, which was mentioned in the Canto, who were handed over to 9 different sages. I shall now describe the descendants of those 9 daughters. Please hear from me. So the 9 sages, different sages that who received the daughters of Kardama Muni were very important sages like Marichi, Atri, Vashisht, and they were also called Manas Putras. They were creations by Lord Brahma just from his own mind, because he's the supreme creator in this material world. He's the secondary creator, and he in the beginning created personalities just by thinking about them. Rishis who were Manas Putras, but then wedded to the daughters of Kardama Muni and Devahuti. So the first daughter that's mentioned here is Kardama Muni's daughter Kala, and she was married to the Rishi Marichi, giving birth to 2 children whose names were Kashyap and Purnima. Their descendants are spread all over the world. There's not much mention about Kashyap Rishi in this particular discussion here. The mention comes later, but just to recall, Kashyap Rishi was also one of the chief progenitors in this material creation. He later on, as we'll be reading, gets married to 13 daughters of Daksh Prajapati, and through that union, a lot of important personalities appeared. Kashyap Muni had different wives, and of the prominent wives that we know, one is Mother Aditi, through which the Devtas were born, the demigods appeared in this world. And then there's Mother Diti, through which the Asuras or Daityas were born. There is Kadru, through which a lot of the prominent Nagas or Sarpas were born. And there's Vanita, through who's the mother of Garud Dev as well. So that is the historical reference of Kashyap Rishi. The other son in text 14 is described. Purnima, he begot 3 children, namely Viraj, Vishwaga, and Devakulya. Devakulya, who was the daughter of Purnima, had very wonderfully served the lotus feet of Lord Vishnu. So that is why when Lord Vishnu appeared as Vaman Dev, and he pierced the covering of this material universe, the water from the causal ocean or the Karana Sagar entered the covering of the material universe and entered into our material world, and that personality, the deity of that water, was Devakulya, who appeared as Mother Ganges in this material world. That description is given by Prabhupada and the Prabhupada. Now, so after having talked about the first daughter of Kardama Muni and Devahuti, which is Kala, who was married to the Rishi Marichi, the discussion moves on to the second daughter, whose name is Anasuya. Now, Mother Anasuya was married to Atri Rishi, who's also a very wonderful personality. And through that union, they gave birth to three famous sons, Soma, Dattatreya, and Durvasha Muni, and who were all partial representations of Lord Vishnu, Shiva, and Lord Brahma. Just a brief mention about Mother Anasuya. So we hear briefly about her in Ramayana when Lord Ram and Mother Sita visit the ashram of Atri Muni and Mother Anasuya, who is very well known for her chastity. And they have a conversation with her and in the Chitrakoot mountains when they visit. So in this particular context, there's a description how there were three wonderful sons born to this relationship between Atri Muni and Mother Anasuya. In this particular shloka, which is going to be a purport to read today, Prabhupada gives a very elaborate purport and describes in great detail, the different amshas or expansions of the Supreme Personality of God. So he lays emphasis on the last line of the shloka, Atma Esha Brahma Sambhavan. So there are three personalities mentioned in this. Atma, that is, represents the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who exists in the form of Paramatma in everybody, in every living entity. Isha, or controller, who's referred, and that's the reference for Lord Shiva, because he's referred to as a controller in this material world, in this material creation. Not the supreme controller, but just the controller in this material creation. And the third personality mentioned is Brahma Sambhavan, that is Lord Brahma himself. So, Prabhupada goes on to explain that each living entity that is created in this material world is an amsha of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. We are parts and parcels of the Supreme Person. However, each amsha is not equal to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. They are created in different capacities, and according to the material nature, they are enveloped in different coverings. So each living entity, although created as a part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is still at the same time different from him. And he goes on to explain how Vishnu Tattva, Shiva Tattva, and Jiva Tattva, including starting from Lord Brahma onwards, is different from each other. In the Bhagavad Gita 15th chapter, 7th shlok, Lord Krishna explains that Mamai Vamsha Jiva Loke, Jiva Bhuta Sanatana. That all the living entities are my Ansha, including the Jivatmas. In the Varha Puran, there is a mention of the different expansions of Lord Vishnu, or the creation living entities through Lord Vishnu and different Amshas. There are two phrases that are mentioned. One is Swa Amsha, which is the self-expansion of Lord Vishnu into the Vishnu Tattvas. And second is Vibhinna Amshas, which is the expansion of Supreme Personality of Godhead into different living entities and that become part and parcel from him. And they are Vibhinna Amshas or Jivas. In the Jivas also, there are different categories of consciousness in the Jivas, which we see in our common day-to-day experience as well. And that is because the Jiva Tattva is considered as the marginal energy of the Lord. So being the marginal energy, the Tathastha Shakti of the Lord, the Jiva can fall under the influence of Maya Devi in different proportions. And based on the amount of covering of the consciousness of the Jiva Tattva, there are different categories that the Jiva Tattva resides in. The covering also depends on the Jiva Tattva's karmas and as well as his influence of the modes of nature. And according to the covering of the living entity, the different jivas, the different jiva tattvas, they enjoy happiness or suffering according to that amount of covering. For example, so in mode of goodness, we take the example of diet. People who follow a very healthy diet, a very sattvic diet, they tend to have much longer and happier life and have a better health. people who are in a mode of passion, they're covered by this mode of passion. Those Jiva Tattvas tend to have a little bit more suffering because they're eating a lot of sort of spicy food that can create a lot of digestive issues, and they tend to have some more disease. And the third Jiva Tattva, who's in the mode of ignorance, is very densely covered, and they don't discriminate in what they intake. So they often take in a lot of intoxication, and because of that, they suffer lots of terrible diseases and have a miserable death. So in that fashion, there's different Jiva Tattvas, although they're all amshas and parts and parcels of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because they have different layers of covering, they go through different types of happiness and suffering in this material world. Prabhupada makes a very wonderful statement in this purport that pure Krishna consciousness is the birthright of every living entity. So we oftentimes when we come into Krishna consciousness and we practice, we are, my understanding at least initially was that we're in this material world, and somehow we have to learn about the spiritual world and try to go back to Godhead. But I think what I've understood is that we should begin to realize that we're actually not material beings who are on a spiritual journey, but we are spiritual beings who are on a material journey. That this is not our home. What we see here is not natural for the Jivatma, for the soul. This whole concept of birth, disease, old age, death, being separated from our loved ones, seeing our loved ones go through misery, this is not natural for the soul or the Jivatma, because we don't belong here. This is not our home. Our home is in the spiritual world. And in the spiritual world, with that consciousness, somehow got covered for us, and we entered into this material world, and now because of that we are suffering. But if we can just, through the help of shastras and the association of devotees, remind ourselves of our true eternal position of being Krishna's eternal servant, we can return back home, back to God. So we have to understand that we're not a part of this world, this material world. We're not material beings, but we are spiritual beings who are on this material journey, through which we have to make some understanding, we have to learn something, and return back home, back to God. In the Bhagavad Gita, third chapter, 38th shloka, Lord Krishna describes, in response to Arjun's question about how a living entity suffers in this world, and how the lust covers the living entity and enables him to go through all this suffering in different degrees. Lord Krishna responds in the 38th shloka, Dhumena vriyate vahani yatha darsho malena cha yatha benavrito garbhas tatha tenedam avritam. Lord Krishna describes that the living entity, this pure spiritual spark, who's a part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, gets covered by material consciousness in 3 different degrees. The first example that's given, which relates to human beings in general, is how a fire is covered with smoke. So sometimes when you see that there is smoke coming from a place, and the smoke is so dense that you can very barely see a little bit of fire coming out. So you know that this fire is there inside somewhere where the smoke is coming from. That consciousness or that example of covering is applicable to human beings in general. The second example of covering Lord Krishna describes is the covering of the mirror covered by dust. So when the mirror is covered by dust, that it's very difficult to see your own consciousness in that mirror. So similarly to that, when this example is related to animals, so usually the consciousness of animals, again, although they are jiva tattvas, they are parts and parcels of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, those jivatmas, but because they are so densely covered that it is difficult for them to break through this covering and understand spiritual knowledge. And the third and most helpless situation is described as how a fetus is covered by the womb of a mother. So from the outside, there is no possibility of looking in the inside. From the inside, there's no possibility of looking in the outside. So that living entity, that Jiva Tattva, even though being a part and parcel of Supreme Personality of Godhead, is very densely covered. And that example is related to trees and plants. So in the first example, where human beings are covered with that fire, are compared to that fire who's covered by smoke, what I realized from that is that when we come in association of devotees and when we read the Shastras, that fire can become brighter and can blaze brighter and brighter. Till one point, you can see that fire very, very clearly. And we come to the platform, a devotee reaches the platform of Brahma Bhuteshu Prasannatma na Sochati na Kankshati. And he's able to break through all those layers that are covering him and reach that supreme state of complete Krishna consciousness. That's an explanation of the different tattvas and how tattvas are different. So when Prabhupada is explaining in this purport, he explains that although the three personalities appeared, that is Dattatreya, the word Dattatreya means one who gave himself to Atri. Datta Atri, and that's the Supreme Personality of God, its expansion, the Vishnu Tattva, Dattatreya. Next is Soma, or next is actually Durvasha, who is an expansion of Lord Shiva and is the Shiva Tattva. So Shiva Tattva is different from, it's a sort of intermediary between Vishnu Tattva and Jiva Tattva. And the last is Soma, that is the moon god, who's an expansion from Brahma and comes under the Jiva Tattva. Prabhupada also explains in terms of calculations in the purport how Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, has 100% of the qualities. Whereas as we come down, the Vishnu Tattvas have about 94%, the Shiva Tattvas have about 84%, and Lord Brahma has about 78% of the qualities of that's present in the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And then the Jivatmas, like we discussed, based on the amount of covering of their consciousness, the number of qualities exhibited becomes less. Prabhupada also gives an example in the purport as to the covering or the consciousness of the Jivatma in terms of how we describe energies of bulbs. So there are some bulbs that are a little bright, some are that brighter. We normally use the term lumens. This is 50 lumen bulb, it's a 100 lumen bulb. So similarly, as the layering of material energy becomes less and less, the Jivatma's consciousness and qualities continues to sort of increase and manifest further and further. That was a brief description about the different tattvas that are present and how they are different, how the Vishnu tattva is different than Shiva tattva, and that's different from Jiva tattva based on the covering and the percentage of qualities. But it's also, coming back to the point that Prabhupada had mentioned, that the Krishna consciousness is the birthright of every living entity, also tells us that when we preach and we meet different personalities, we should remember that each and every person is part and parcel of Supreme Personality of Godhead, because as Prabhupada describes it, that is his birthright. Sometimes we meet different personalities while preaching who are aggressive towards us, and they may say vile things and they may degrade us, but we should still try and see that pure ansha, pure tattva that's from the Supreme Personality of Godhead that is behind it. Jesus Christ had said that you should hate the sin but not the sinner. So oftentimes when we meet such personalities and they behave in an untoward fashion towards us, we should try and remember that the pure soul that is in this body is struggling, and because of its covering, it's very difficult for us to penetrate that covering to reach that pure consciousness of that person we're trying to communicate to. But underneath that person is will be conscious. All right. So having said this, the three wonderful really asks a question, but we've not usually heard about three different personalities appearing in three different manifestations from the same person. Right? Usually, the Lord Vishnu takes birth from a particular set of parents, or another devotee another powerful personality will take birth. But all three appearing at the same time to one couple is usually not heard of. So Vidura pauses and asks Maitreya Muni this question: "My dear master, how is it that the three deities, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, became the offspring of the wife of Atri Muni? What is the reason behind it?" And this is a very valid question. And then Maitreya Muni goes on to explain how, in the next few shlokas from text 17 to 19, how Atri Muni and Mother Anasuya, in order to sort of create, bring sort of more progeny into this world as part of their duties of Prajapati, they went to the Riksha mountain, did wonderful austerities. They chose a place that was very conducive to the mode of goodness, which was very clean and had very pleasing vibrations. And in that particular place, they performed this yoga where Atri Muni was standing on one leg only and was eating nothing but just air. Anilo Bhojana. So all he was eating was just consuming air. And in this way, he did tapasya for a number of years, standing on one leg in order to please the Supreme Personality. In text 20, he describes, he prays, he was thinking like this, Atri Muni, that may Lord of the universe of whom I have taken shelter kindly be pleased to offer me a son exactly like him. In the purport to this, Prabhupada explains that it seems like Atri Muni, although being so advanced in Vedic knowledge, still wasn't completely clear in his understanding of who the Supreme Personality of Godhead is. And oftentimes, I think before coming into Krishna consciousness, before meeting devotees, myself included, a lot of times we are in this predicament where we have some understanding of religion, some understanding of the supreme power, but we don't know exactly who that Supreme Personality of Godhead is. Or we think there are multiple people in charge of this creating of this universe. So similarly with Atri Muni, he wasn't exactly sure who was in charge and who was responsible, but he knew, based on his understanding of the Veda, that there is a supreme person, a supreme personality who is helping to run the show, who's managing the different affairs of this universe, who's controlling the different things, who's maintaining it, and at times destroying it as needed. But not having complete knowledge and not having that feeling of bhakti, of service, he wasn't offered that complete knowledge of the supreme person. An example is given here of Gajendra Maharaj as well. So Gajendra Maharaj also, when we read in Srimad Bhagavatam Canto 8, in chapter 3, the prayers of Maharaj Gajendra, when he starts to pray, at the end of his prayers, Sukdev Goswami comments, and Prabhupada writes in the purport, that it seems that even Gajendra Maharaj at that time was not certain to whom he was addressing his prayers. But the difference between Atri Muni's prayers and Gajendra Maharaj's prayers is Gajendra Maharaj knew that there is that one supreme person whose shelter I need to take, who can deliver me from this material world. Because at that point, he prays that there is no point of me, even if I am saved from this predicament, to continue into this elephant body, which is full of ignorance and avidya. Rather, I would want to be delivered from the situation and always be a loving servant of that supreme person. Whereas Atri Muni, in this particular case, although he wasn't aware of the supreme person, he still wanted to pray to that higher power, and instead of requesting to serve him directly, he wanted to have a son who just had the similar qualities of this higher power. So as a result of it, Prabhupada mentions in the purport that his desire was not pure, because he did not want directly to serve the Lord, but he only wanted a son that would have the similar qualities of the creator, maintainer, and destroyer of the universe, in order to possibly increase his pride. That comparison is we can understand between the prayers of Maharaj Gajendra and Atri Muni in this particular case. How Maharaj Gajendra, he knew that his supreme shelter would be that one supreme person who would deliver him from this. So like this, Atri Muni prays to that higher power. And with that, a blazing fire came out. And Prabhupada describes that with that blazing fire, the three deities, principal deities of the world, because it wasn't sure who they were being addressed, who was being addressed by this request. So all the three deities appeared, Lord Brahma, Shiva, and Lord Vishnu. Whereas in the case of Gajendra Maharaj, it's also explained in the purport that the demigods were very clear that this particular prayer that is being addressed by Gajendra Maharaj is not being addressed to us, because even we cannot save somebody from this material world. Only the Supreme Personality of Godhead can. And that is why for Gajendra Maharaj, Lord Vishnu appears on Garuda to save him. In text 22, it is described that how when these three personalities appeared, they were accompanied by the denizens of heavenly planets such as Gandharvas, Siddha, Vidyadhar, and Nagas. And so when we invite the Lord into our lives, into our homes, naturally, along with the Lord, a lot of other sort of benefits and good fortune also comes with it. In this regard, I'd like to share a small story with you. Once there was a king, and he had assigned four people to take care of a project. And when that project was over, he was very, very happy with their service. So he wished to award them, based on whatever the desire was. So the first person asked the king that, we have a lot of difficulty with roads. We have poor roads in our village. So the king tells his minister to make sure that they have proper travel arrangements in his village, and that first person is happy. The second person requests that, my house is not very big. I live in a small house. I want to be in a big house. Like I want to have a much more palatial arrangement. So the king, informs his minister, and they take care, and he gets a nice proper house. The third person requests that he wants to be married into a wealthy family. So the king again speaks to his minister, and they arrange for his wedding into a good family. The fourth person is a very simple devotee, and he's happy to serve, and he's just pleased by the service. So when the king asks him to ask for something, he initially refuses, but he says, I'm just happy to be a part of your royal service. I like the way how you conduct your business, and I don't want anything. The king takes offense, and he says, no, you have to ask for something at least. So the fourth person says, okay, if you insist, what I can ask for is if I could serve you directly in my home. So please come and stay with me for a month so I can serve you directly, and I will be pleased with that. So the king now informs his minister, okay, make arrangements so I'll go and stay in his house for a month. So the ministers start inquiring, and they find out that this simple person, lives in a very remote village, and there are no proper roads or access to that. So immediately they give orders, and they start building a lavish road all the way up to his home. And then when they find out more about his home, they realize that he lives in a poor thatched hut. There's no proper place. So how can the king stay there for 1 month? So the ministers give instruction to build a huge palace so that this person can stay and the king can stay with him for a month. And then they realize that he needs to have enough grains and ration to be able to provide facility to the king. So they award him with a lot of riches and wealth to take care of it. So even though the fourth individual did not ask for other things that the first three individuals asked for, just by desiring to serve, he was awarded with all those other things. Similarly, when we invite the Supreme Personality of Godhead into our lives, when we chant the holy name sincerely, we are naturally blessed with all good fortunes in this. Similarly, in this particular case, when Atri Muni invited the Supreme Supreme creators in this universe, along with them, all the wonderful accompaniments, the Gandharvas, Siddhas, Vidyadharas, Nagas, they all appeared to bless him. Now, text 23, it is described that as he saw these wonderful personalities, he approached them on one leg. And in text 24, it is described that he offers Dandavat Pranam to them. And Prabhupada writes in the purport that Dandavat means to fall down straight like a stick. Because a stick doesn't bend, it just falls down straight. The similarity of that is how, in our Vaishnava culture, we offer respects to the deities. And Atri Muni, once he saw the wonderful personalities, he fell down in front of them and paid his obeisances. There's mention of the different carriers of the three different deities: a bull for Lord Shiva, a swan for Lord Brahma, and Garuddev for Vishnu. So with this, we see this wonderful description of the two daughters of Kardama Muni and Mother Devahuti, Mother Kala and Mother Anusuya. So with this, I think we'll end our discussion for today. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, and Antakoti Vaishnavrinda ki jai. Thank you everybody for joining.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji, for such a wonderful class. Let's pay our obeisances. Vancha kalpatarubhyasya krupa sindhubhya vacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Granted Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Thank you very much.
Chaitanya Chandra Das Prabhuji ki jai. Thank you to all devotees for joining the call. Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Thank you very much, Prabhuji. Thank you, Prabhuji.
Let's end the call here.